Remember to turn that off when you go to the toilet, right? That's the number one rule. I think we're going to go ahead and try and get started. I know we've probably got some people still wandering in, but we'll go ahead and get started anyway. Right. Welcome to Designathon. Good morning. Right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know some people may wander in as we go. As I mentioned yesterday, to some extent where you sit is your team. There'll be a little opportunity to shuffle that around, but it's probably good if we get started with the right sort of numbers to begin with, which we're mostly there, but like I've got a 3 up here, one guy, poor guy by himself. Okay, you're expecting more to join. Oh, of course. Okay. Right. All right. Okay. Well, then we're probably okay for now. So we can always reshuffle a little bit. Oh yes, the other step. Let me just see if I get this going, or else I'll... Designathon. What are we doing today? So a nice little summary of it. The idea is this is an end-to-end experience. From problem definition through to design solution compressed into one day, and really compressed. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was reviewing the agenda this morning is that we don't get to what you probably normally think of as your day-to-day design job until well into the day. So by the time we're sitting down and actually sketching out something that's going to be like a prototype, we're well through the day. We've got telephone companies getting in touch with me. Okay. But user experience design, of course, is about more than when you create what you're designing, thinking through designing iteratively. So we'll start putting pen to paper pretty quickly, but the actual prototyping will come later in the day. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you as we go through. Why are we doing this? What are we hoping to get out of this? So there's one thing with learning by doing. So it's a very hands-on day. It's very structured, and I'll be breaking things and coming in and introducing some tools and techniques, and then you'll run through the exercise of doing them as you build toward creating the prototype. Very structured, but it's all about practice. So the longest I'm going to talk at once is going to be up front here, and then it's going to be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there as we move through things. It's all about you. And I also think of this as, if you're a pilot or a surgeon or some other professions, practice, you get to practice. You get to practice your job. We don't get to practice. Everything's live, right? You go to the job, you got to do the job. So this is an opportunity to kind of practice. So take some chances, try some new ways of doing things today, because although there's a competition element of this, it's a chance to try some new things out. End-to-end design based on a real brief, so we'll talk about that smart city brief, that transportation brief, and how we narrow that and focus that in. Focusing on some skills you may not use as regularly. So one of the things we'll be doing, we'll be spending a bit of time with is defining the brief. Going from this very high-level brief to exactly what you're going to work on. My guess is that most of you, from speaking to you yesterday and hearing about the kinds of work that you do, most of you don't get the opportunity to do that a lot. Most of the time you're given, this is what you're working on, get started. And actually the process of going through defining a brief can be a really useful way of learning how to back brief, how to challenge a brief, how to interrogate it, how to shape it better. So we'll go through that process you may not spend as much time on. We'll look at some ideation tools and some ways of sketching and working together as a team. And that's another part of this, is you're working as a team. Design is a team sport. It's something best not done in isolation. Always good, even if you are a UX department of one, it's always good to find people you can bounce ideas off of and work together with, because you get so much richer outcomes that way. So we'll be working together, and that goes very closely with this rapid decision-making part of this. So a big part of what you'll be doing today is forming a team and being able to get through decisions really quickly and move ahead. So keep that in mind, because you need to be very aggressive about your decision-making as a team. And then there's this competition element of challenging yourself against others. So that just gives it a little bit of extra spice. to say that actually, we will be having a kind of pitch at the end and judging those outputs, and we'll talk about those criteria and giving some awards around that. So our agenda, we've got a preliminary bit, so what I'm doing right now, introducing the day, then doing the briefing, and then you'll focus that brief down into some specific focus areas that you as a team want to take forward. We'll talk a bit about what that looks like. Then kind of the workshop itself, and we're basically going through a typical kind of design thinking process of immersion and framing the problem, then and it's very much a converging and diverging process. So immersion and framing the problem, ideation, where we really think about all the different ways you could think about the problem you focused on, triage and focusing in on the thing that you're going to actually build, and then that prototype and pitch prep. And then the last bit will be the actual pitching and some judging, judging that pitch. And during that judging time, you'll also have time to maybe do a little reflection on the day, and then the awards. That process I was talking about, as I say, it's kind of constantly converging and diverging. So we're broadening out our thinking, we're exploring ideas, and then we're deciding as we move through. So from the initial immersion, gathering insights, finding the problem, looking at opportunities, ideation, really exploring, then triage, narrowing down, proposition, deciding what you're going to focus on, execution. We won't do the test and learn part of this, which would definitely be part of this process. But what we will do is, in your presentation, talk about what you would do next. So we'll talk about how we do that. This I think I've already said about 4 times, but that's the idea, is we're expanding and contracting continuously. And you'll see a lot of a lot of reflections to what was talked about in a couple of different ways yesterday, that lean UX model, where we're taking some insights, sketching things out, and and iterating on that. The one thing we won't do a very good job of today, because it's an exercise, is actual customer input. In an ideal world, this would take place over 2 days or over a week, and we would go out and talk to people and gather insights. Now the nice thing is, you have a table full of people who have experience in the area that we're looking at. That's one of the reasons we chose transportation. So you can kind of use each other for that, but we know as UX designers that when you're involved in the design process, you're not necessarily the best version of the customer. So it's a bit of a proxy, but I think it's enough for us to be able to gather those inputs. Does that all make sense to everybody? Is that kind of meet with your expectations and make sense how we go through this? Comfortable with that? Okay. So there's one thing that will happen during the day, is that you're going to be heads down working on stuff, and it's going to get noisy, and you're going to be really into it, and then I'm going to stop you way before you're ready to finish, because you're not going to have nearly enough time to do anything today. Just get used to that. That's the nature of the way a day like this works. You're going to be about, if I just had 10 more minutes to talk about this, we could totally nail this, and that's when you'll be done, and there won't be a second longer, because we got a lot to fit in today. One of the ways we do that is there's this technique of quieting a room that works with preschoolers, but it also works with everybody, which is I'm going to raise my hand. And when I raise my hand, Nitesh and other people who are facilitating are going to raise, he's going to see me raise my hand, he's going to raise his hand. As soon as you see us raise our hands, everybody else raise your hand. So let's just practice that. So I'm raising my hand, everybody raises their hand. When you see those hands go up, you know it's time to be quiet. That keeps me from having to shout over you and go, okay, we're done now, stop, and everybody just keeps going. No, really, seriously? Okay, so you see the hand go up, everybody goes quiet, and then we move on to the next thing. Right, so smart cities. So smart cities is an interesting topic to be doing here in this city in particular, in this country in particular, where, I come from a city, I'm based in a city in Singapore, that's been very much about the smart city concept and the smart nation concept. Of course, I was telling a few people yesterday, it's easy to have a smart nation when your nation consists of one city. But it's a smart city, and it's been built kind of from the ground. There was nothing there, then you build the smart city. Dubai a bit the same way. India has some different challenges in that there's already a very significant urban infrastructure. There are some plans for completely fresh smart cities, but there's also the idea of how do we make cities smarter. And the prospect of 100 smart cities in India by 2022, massive amounts of money being invested in that. Not only money from the Indian government, but also the public-private partnerships and bringing in private funding. There'll be a lot of money going into this. It's going to be a major undertaking, and it's one of those kind of undertakings like putting a man on the moon that it kind of doesn't, it's less about reaching it and it's more about what it generates and what people start thinking about, what they start doing. So there's a lot of opportunity around that. And there's a real strong driver there. Oh, that's missing a bullet point. This is a separate point. That by 2050, the urban population of India will double. So the expectation is that just through population growth and migration, India is going to become that much more urban. 75% of India's GDP coming from urban centers. So, those some pretty big shifts, some pretty significant changes. And cities are already pushed to their limits. So actually, I think one of the ways to think about smart cities is making adaptive cities. There's a couple of different terms that people have started throwing around smart cities because nobody's super happy with the term. One of them is smarter cities, saying actually that cities aren't so dumb right now, so we don't need to make them smart, but let's make them smarter. And also that's the idea of it's not about building brand new cities, but about making cities smarter. And the other is adaptable cities. And so I think that's a nice way to think about it, is that actually, can we build an infrastructure built on the back of the kind of digital technology that we have now that makes cities more adaptable? So yeah, what is a smart city? Ask 10 people, you'll get 12 answers. Ask 10 people in the government, you'll probably get 15 answers. It's still kind of, there's lots of different discussions and decisions about that, but I think there's a few terms that I think are pretty consistent around what smart city is about. So the way we'll use it for our purposes today, and I think is useful, for us, and is also pretty much in line with the way people think about it, is that a smart city uses a city that uses data and digital technologies to enhance sustainability, encouraging more efficient use of resources. So sustainability is a key driver. Economic growth by innovating new products and markets. So can we, by changing the infrastructure of the city oriented around digital, can we change that? Becoming more open and inclusive by enabling greater citizen participation in governance. And then finally, increasing adaptability by being able to respond faster and more effectively. And the main categories around that are transportation, communications, energy, healthcare, water, and waste. And you'll see various versions of that, but it generally comes down to those categories. Now, the interesting thing about transportation is if you think about how much transportation affects those others, transportation and health, transportation and environment, there's lots of crossover in there. So we'll focus on transport, but affects other things. And you can see these are just some little examples of some of the kind of technologies that are out there. So this is a dashboard from the City of London, not a particularly smart city, but not one of the ones that would be up there in the top level of the list. But there is a lot of information out there. It's got, it was, I think Singapore now is, but London was the most surveilled city in the world. So there are more CCTV cameras than anywhere else in the world. So there's a lot of data that can be gathered from that. There's sensors in all the public transport. There's all sorts of sensors and data. So this is a dashboard that pulls some of that together. And that's one way of thinking about the technology. This is a little pollution device that the idea was that this would be connected to street sweepers. I think this might have been a California initiative, but connected to street sweepers. So you get a street-by-street measurement of pollution levels. And then that joins up on the network, and so you can gather that data and build a map of pollution. This is a social media map of a city. So just by aggregating social media data, looking at what's happening in the city and kind of seeing the shape of the city in terms of its citizenry and what people are talking about, and the population by looking at social media. This is a little illustration of smart lighting. So again, taking digital technology and sensors to make lighting more effective. And this is a dynamic automated traffic management system. So again, taking sensor-based data and then automating that you change speed limits or close roads or open roads or do various things around that. So those are some of the kinds of things that are already out there. I've got one little clip of video from the city of Amsterdam that has a smart cities project in place, and I show this just because it gives a little bit more of the feel rather than the facts of a smart city. And I just thought I'd play this, and it just gives some of the some thinking about what the intention around the smart city idea is. So let me just let this go. again, very different kind of context as a city than what Indian cities look and feel like. But I think, interesting to see. The other interesting thing about that is there's nothing in there that isn't existing technology, and that's actually part of the brief today, is that we don't need to invent a world of jetpacks and transporter beams to change the nature of cities. So that's part of what we want to focus on. So again, our focus is traffic and transportation. And this is the brief. And by the way, we're going to try and get this printed so everyone can have one copy at each table so that you can kind of keep reflecting back on it. But this is the brief for the day. So design an application, and I've got that in brackets for a reason, using digital technology that helps make cities smarter and more human. So one of the things that, if you go back to that, actually let me flick back to that. I'm going to have to flick past the movie again. But if you look at this list, one thing that seems really missing from this for me, I mean, other than maybe more inclusive, where are the people? Right? As user experience designers, you kind of look at that and go, great, we're going to force feed people a bunch of technology and it's going to improve the economy and maybe it'll do something about the environment. Where are the people? And I think one of the things our role is, as people who are advocates of customers, of consumers, of users, is to say, how can we make cities smarter and more human? So can we do this in a way that focuses on people? It's kind of a secondary objective. So again, the idea is, it's very tempting when you start getting into something like smart cities to think of big infrastructure projects that are going to be really top-down and massively expensive to do. And the idea of this is, what could be done bottom-up? What could be done to change things in a more, self-service, voluntary kind of mode, so that you're enabling and empowering people to do things differently. Now, there may absolutely be in your output something that is a, like a city-run project. That's completely fine. But think of it in terms of how can we help people solve things for themselves and using available technology. So I'm happy for you to invent something in the process, come up with something that doesn't exist or you're not sure if it exists. But what I want to try and prevent there is that people go off into the world of jetpacks and transporters, right? That we don't come up with amazing technology that if it could exist would solve all the problems. There's enough existing technology and data. There's enough in what we can do right now that there's an enormous amount that we're able to do. So that's what we want to think about, and then focus specifically on the problem of traffic and transportation, obviously, within the whole world of smart cities. Make sense as a brief? Okay, and again, there'll be time to interrogate this as we go through. So some of the kinds of topics that you might focus on, again, we're starting out with smart cities, we go right down to transportation, still really, really big. If we want to focus down a bit more, it's still going to be really big. You're going to be narrowing down more as we go through this. But an example of some of the kinds of topics that you might want to narrow down on as a group and center around. So for example, you might say, how can we make the daily commute more enjoyable and useful experience? No matter what we do to fix transportation, there's still going to be some time on the road or in a train or whatever it is. Can we make that more useful, more enjoyable? Right now, the extent to which that's a waste of time, your most frustrating part of the day, that's actually one of the biggest problems with transport. So there's where you could solve that, where you could go with that. How might we manage traffic better? Obviously, again, commute in this morning being a bit of field study for me, and the ride home last night. We got to experience that Maratali coming together mess thing that was mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday, and you can really see just how challenging that is. How might we support voluntary action to make traffic more manageable? Just another spin on that same thing. And how might we encourage more use of public transportation? So again, we can't go and build trains and build subways, but can we encourage people to use that more, take more cars off the road, for example, if you see that as one of the key problems. Or you could take a direction completely differently, in a different direction. How could we decrease the pollution from traffic? So maybe the main focus that you want to take is more environmental, and you say actually the traffic pollution is the thing that we want to get on top of. So, those are just, this is not by any means part of the brief. This is just examples of some of the directions that you could go, and we're going to do an exercise to kind of think through some of those in a moment. And we'll talk about that format too, that how might we question format. Now I know that already some of you are going to have some big buts in your mind. That's why I got a picture of big butts. You're going to go, this can't be, we have to these big investments that we're not going to make, and but we're not in control of the government to change things, whatever those things are, but people will never do things that way, but. So I want to put another kind of definition or at least truism about innovation, is that real innovation comes from confronting constraints, back to that Charles Eames quote that I kicked off yesterday's talk, from confronting constraints, embracing them, and then leveraging them to create something new. So actually, those buts are your richest source of potential innovation and potential interesting solutions to problems. So I'll give you an example of what I mean, just a really quick story. This is a picture of myself and my wife and a friend on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Sydney, Australia. There's this fantastic experience called the Sydney Harbour Bridge Walk, where you walk over the bridge, and I don't mean